It's hard for him to get to a shade of red. Right. You understand? But you could tell in his expression. We had to pick Owusu up from the airport. So here we are in a car, the four of us in a car. Two people are speaking Tree, which is their native dialect tongue. My sister and I are speaking English with no idea what they're talking about. We are in where? Charlottesville, Virginia, because that's where the airport was. And we were driving into Charlottesville. We decided to get something to eat. So it happens that we saw signs for a Mexican restaurant. That's where we ate. They're still speaking Tree. My sister and I are still speaking English. In a Mexican restaurant that was decorated for St. Patrick's Day. I tell you that story because that's who we are as Americans. That's who we really are. Owusu, you the man, okay? You the guy. And I'm so happy for you. I really am, that you're receiving this honor because I can't think of anyone who deserves it more, really. And I wish you the best. And I really hope that you don't plan in your retirement to move to Ghana, back to Ghana, okay? You can visit, but don't move back there. There are too many of us who love you and who want you here.
David was my first tenure track hire, and it was in the summer, and I had interviewed the first candidate for the position, who was also an African national, and we had housed him at the motel that the university now owns and knocked down over on Port Republic Road. And I was to take the other fellow out to the airport as David was brought in by one of my colleagues, and we had dinner together before I drove the other fellow to the airport and interviewed David. And it was very clear, sitting with the two of them, which one was going to wind up with the job. It was David was much more outgoing and much more, just his presence told me he would do well in a classroom, that students would really enjoy him and enjoy working with him, and I certainly was right. The interesting part of the story is, as I was checking the other gentleman out, he and David were talking, and the fellow behind the clerk behind the counter said, I have a question for you. He said, we don't usually get many Africans here. What's going on? And I said, this is strictly confidential, and I don't want you to mention this to anyone, but they are both poultry experts from the United Nations, and they're here working with local farmers on the avian flu. So, please keep that confidential. And when David went back to his room that night, there was a large bowl of fruit and a bottle of wine waiting for him from the proprietor. So that was David's introduction to Harrisonburg. And he then interviewed the next day and the following day, and there was no doubt in anyone's mind but that he was the choice for the position. David came to me in his first or second year, and he said that he wanted to become the faculty advisor to the JMU Rugby Club, men and women. And I said, if you enjoy doing that, go ahead. So he was their advisor for a number of years. And quite honestly, the thing David liked most about it was after every rugby match, the players got a keg and they sat and drank beer together. David, I've known you for almost 40 years. From the first time I met you, I was convinced that you would be a major contributor at JMU. And I was hopeful that you'd be a good friend. And I'm pleased that over the years you've been both. Um, you earned my trust very early on, so much so that I entrusted my daughter to your care for the first Ghana program. It's changed her life, as she will tell you and tell anyone who asks. It's been a pleasure knowing you, and I know of no one more worthy of this tribute than you.
But he always drove with the steering wheel right in his chest, and he often drove faster than he should have. And so one time the car was making some noise, and he said, "Can you get in there and see if you can, tell what it is?" Because this was all kind of new to him. And so I got in, and the seat was set way up, and so I moved it back. And he looked at me, goes, "It does that?" And he had bought the car from Chung Yoon, who was probably 5'2", might have weighed 100 pounds. David's larger than that. And so he's got the steering wheel in his chest when he's driving. And it's hard not to speed because he's so close. So his driving, after we solved the issue with the seat, his driving, I think, was much improved. I love you, bud, and I'll see you again soon.
One year, my teenage son was volunteered to help us. And at the end of the day, my teenage son said, "I've got to go home and go to bed," because he said, "David Owusu-Ansah worked my ass off." He said, "I'm exhausted. The man's 40 years older than I am, and I can't keep up." We were loading up my pickup truck with firewood out in the woods. We'd made a big stack, and it was fall. It was about 40-something degrees, and there was about a 1 foot long, maybe 18-inch long rattlesnake. And it was cold, and it was just barely moving. So I just took a stick and threw it off into the woods. And I turned around to start throwing wood in, and David Owusu-Ansah is in the bed of the pickup truck. And I went, "What are you doing up there?" He goes, "I'll stack the wood up here." I said, "Why?" He goes, "I hate snakes." He never left the pickup truck. He literally made me go over and open the passenger door, and he crawled across all the firewood and climbed into the truck because he was afraid the snake was going to be right there trying to bite him. He was so funny. David bought a blue Volkswagen Beetle, the old Beetle from like the 70s, from one of our colleagues who was Asian and very short. And so the seat was really close to the steering wheel. And we were out driving one night, and David was driving like this. David's 6'2", 6'3", driving like this. And Chris Arndt goes, "Why are you driving like that?" And he goes, "Because this is the way the car came." And Chris said, "Here." And he pulled the lever, and the seat went back, and David stopped the car and went, "Oh my God, you can do this." Yeah, it was like, "Oh my God, this is a revelation. This is so cool." Yeah. And then when he bought his first brand new car, he drove to Minnesota to show his friends, and then turned around and came back. I know you're going to be embarrassed by all of this, all the attention. You're probably hanging your head at some point and probably shaking your head. But please accept all the kudos, all the praise, all the pats on the back, because you deserve it. And please laugh for everyone, because you have the best laugh in the entire world.
Dr. Owe, I just want to thank you for all you've done for me, for JMU, and that, I will continue to stay in touch, and I wish you all the best, and thank you for everything.
Me, the moment I will never forget, and I don't think I've forgiven him for this, is he told us, "Unfortunately, y'all, I was going to go with you, but I can't go." And it was his first study abroad of him not going to Ghana with us. And I was like, excuse me, you told me to come to this information session and now you're not going to go. And he was like, "I'm sorry, don't worry. We have trusted leaders." And so PJ end up being my teacher to go. And I was like, okay, PJ's great, but I wanted you. And he was like, don't worry, it's okay. Like just so straightforward. And I'm like, okay, that's what you're saying. At this point, he got me so tied in and bought in. I'm like, whatever. But I'm like so upset because I'm like, I thought you're the one that's going to make the trip. Well, I ended up going, and I mean, just from the moment I got there, everyone would say, "Where's Dr. OA?" Asking about them, and I'm like, "This is wild. We're in a whole different continent, and people are asking where he is. Like his presence is that just seen and noticed and needed." And um, but the thing is, he's so humble. He doesn't talk about it. I like honestly, I can't. To me, the biggest accomplishment is the Ghana program, but honestly, I don't think it is because he's done so much, but he doesn't talk about it. Like, or even when I started working at JMU as a fellow and I graduated, learning about all the different boards he was on, he doesn't talk about it. Like, you don't know. Like, it's just so humble because when he goes into the rooms, he just listens and he just smiles. Sometimes you got to make him crack a smile because otherwise he kind of just I don't know what he's thinking. And I'm like, what are you thinking? Okay. So, but it's like, I would say the greatest accomplishment may be Ghana, but I don't think so. I think the greatest accomplishment is him just being on that campus because no matter what rooms he's in, he really has made a difference and has paved a way for a lot of us that we didn't even know. Okay. I got to get my voice right. I got to get my voice right. If I could say one thing right now, it would be come to Richmond. Come to Richmond and let it change your life. Just like that. Straight face sentence, nothing. Drop mic.
When my daughter got admitted to college, he called, he talked to her, directly. He even sent her a gift. He tried to make her feel like she was, just she was coming of age and there was something special was happening to her, and she always remembered that. So he's definitely, he's a very special person. All right, so David, you've been, congratulations, you've been a wonderful, positive influence for all of us, and you've set you set the path, and all of us are just, we're just following you, and I'm very happy and glad to have known you.
Two in mind, but so the first story I would share about David was just when working from somebody from a distance and working in a particular area, you don't get the chance to see someone's day-to-day process. And I remember one of the first assignments and projects we had to work with was developing relationships with historically black colleges and universities across the Commonwealth of Virginia and beyond. And working with David, he was tireless. He would travel all across the Commonwealth, host meetings. There was no virtual, there was no doing this by Zoom, it was all in person. And when there were challenges working with historically black colleges in Virginia because of past relationships they've had with other large institutions in the Commonwealth, David went outside and built relationships with Morgan State, Bowie State, Howard University in that process. And so in that, one thing I notice about David is that when you give him an assignment, get out of his way. He is going to be tireless. He's going to keep working. He works beyond. There's no such thing as a 40-hour work week and no such thing as weekends for him. He's going to get it until the job is done. And the biggest thing that I appreciate about David, he's always about relationships. Everything was about people. He'd meet somebody, he'd connect with somebody, and he would go out of the way to help them be successful and their relatives and family members. How can he connect them with other people he knew? So he's always being a connector of people. Secondly, in terms of knowing David, you don't realize you're next to a superstar until someone else lets you know who you're with. And I didn't realize in terms of David's level of understanding the Ghanaian and United States relationships, how he's asked to brief new ambassadors from Ghana to help them acclimate to their job here in the U.S., that he is writing documents of history for the country. I'm not saying for your city, I'm not saying for your town, I'm not saying for your high school. He is helping the country understand its history and its role in society. And so that's when I began, by observation. I didn't realize, I'm like, well, David is a superstar. And David won't tell you he's a superstar, but he was. And not only that, called upon dignitaries from the U.S. when they have to interact with Ghana and Ghanaian leaders and vice versa. And so that let me know the level of knowledge and influence that David would bring to the table, and that David would be humble and really, I would say not so much shy, but wouldn't be forthtelling of his own ability and service that he was doing as well. And the last one I'm going to share about David, this is personal. And it's not so much personal to me, but it's personal how he impacted my family. When David and I started working together, we've been working together for about a year and serving at the senior leadership levels at the university. My wife in her 30s lost her mother. And so, my wife, in losing her mother, I mentioned to David, I'm going to be away in this scenario. But you know what David did? Because I called him from the hospital we were in Hampton, Virginia. He got in his car and drove 3.5 hours down, not to see me, to see my wife. And for them to talk, maybe spend an hour of time, and for them to even get back on the road. So David carved out 8 hours of his day, dropped everything, just to look my wife in the eye and say, how you doing? And ever since then, beyond my own capacity to work and honor and support and work with David, my wife always looked at me and said, I'll never forget what Dr. Usansa did and how important that was to me as a 30-year-old losing my mama. And whatever he needs, Art, you will help support David to make sure he's successful in everything you've done. And I've tried to honor her words ever since then and working with David because of how he touched my family moving forward. David, it has been my honor to work with you these last, I would say in your time, we'll call it 25 years in your experience. But you know what? The most important thing I've enjoyed about you is I've enjoyed how you touch, care, and support everybody. I have been touched, I have been supported, and I appreciate your voice in my life. Thank you for not only being a colleague, but being a friend throughout this time and season. Congratulations, have a great celebratory event, and receive the accolades that others are giving you. Have a great day.
So David, we've known each other for 22 years. You've been a tremendous mentor and supporter, and always been very supportive of the things that I've been involved in, either in the history department as a GA 20 years ago, in the admissions office here at the university, as the director of Valley Scholars, and now as the executive director with the Reddick Center. You've been a great cheerleader and someone that I always could rely on for support and for guidance, and I thank you for that and everything you've done.